When KCM first debuted in the manga, it felt as if Naruto could literally do anything. He went from your typical Shadow Clone Rasengan combo to mountain-destroying Bijuu bombs, chakra avatars, and believe it or not, the ability to physically interact with souls. It's as if he became this system-defying force that could even match the speed of instant teleportation with just his physical movement. At some points it felt as if he was unbeatable, and to be honest, he should have been. To understand what I mean by this, we first need to grasp what KCM is and how it works. This form debuted back in chapter 499 of Naruto's manga, moments after Naruto succeeded in extracting the chakra of the Nine Tails. He attained this yellow chakra mode, which of course provided a boost to his speed, strength, and just overall potency of his abilities. Now all of that is pretty surface level, but there is a deeper mechanic to how the form functions. This goes back to the process of extracting the chakra from the Nine Tails itself. As explained by Mr. Gamatora, the Nine Tails' power is a mixture of his chakra and his will. So to control his power, one needs to extract just the Nine Tails chakra and then convert it into one's own chakra. The problem is that the will of the Nine Tails tags along with his chakra, and since the will of the Nine Tails is a lump of hatred, it ferrets out any hate lying around in one's heart and tries to bind to it to take over. So to control the power of the Nine Tails, one must have a strong willpower, empty of hate, that can separate the will of the Nine Tails from his own chakra. That is why the Eight Tails said to Naruto that while using the power of the Nine Tails in the form of KCM, he doesn't have to worry about going on a rampage. This is the chakra of the Nine Tails in its purest form, absent of his will and hatred. It also serves to explain why the form looks the way that it does. Most people have no idea why Naruto's chakra mode is now suddenly yellow. Why isn't it red similar to his version 1 and version 2 state? Why doesn't he take the form of the Nine Tails similar to the other Bijuu? Well, it goes back to why it's important to separate the will of the Nine Tails from its chakra. You see, the power of the Bijuu inherently has their will attached to it, and when that energy leaks out into the Jinchuriki, it starts to seek stability. It does this by reshaping the body of the vessel into a miniature version of itself, in an effort to assume its full form. So if one was to separate the will of the Bijuu from its chakra, then this form wouldn't exist, which is why Naruto's KCM is different from his version 1 state and version 2 state. This also explains why KCM has that yellow chakra instead of the red one. When Naruto separated the will of the Nine Tails from the chakra he extracted, it no longer belonged to the Nine Tails. In fact, the chakra was then converted to Naruto's chakra as stated by Gamatora, and then stored in a separate section of his body. Now some will say that this still doesn't explain why KCM is yellow, because if the chakra was converted to Naruto's chakra, wouldn't it be blue instead? Well, the answer to that question is that it should have been, at least per the anime continuity. You see, in the manga, the color of Naruto's chakra is actually yellow. In fact, most chakra forms in Naruto have that very same color, whether it be Naruto's Rasengan, his Rasen Shuriken, Kakashi's Rasengan, Jiraiya's Rasengan, and even the Raikage's chakra cloak, all of which were changed to blue in the anime for some reason, which is why there's this inconsistency. So Naruto's KCM being yellow isn't and was never random. The chakra he stole from the Nine Tails was converted to his chakra, and since his chakra has the color yellow, his chakra cloak would obviously be the same color. Now some might say this seems a bit contradictory when it comes to KCM 2, since he's now taking power directly from the Nine Tails. So he should have the red chakra cloak similar to Killer Bee, and he should transform into the full body Nine Tails instead of the yellow avatar. It does have sound logic, but that isn't necessarily true. For one, Naruto does still have the ability to use the red chakra as seen during the final valley with Sasuke, and also later on in Naruto Gaiden. He can also manifest Kurama in his true form, and separate from his body as seen in Naruto the Last. What this implies is that it's a choice. He can choose to use Kurama's chakra without converting it to his chakra, which is why it stays red. Or he can choose to convert it to his chakra, which turns it to yellow. Secondly, the avatar state itself obviously has many benefits over Kurama's true form, so it makes sense why Naruto would want to continue to use it even though he no longer needs to. So KCM 2 is simply KCM 1 with more access to Kurama's full reserve of chakra, which goes on to further amplify his existing powers. With that said, and now that we understand what KCM is and what KCM isn't, what exactly is the problem with this form? And how did Kishimoto unknowingly make it a bit too broken? Well, that has a lot to do with the lore-breaking, overpowered nature of his shadow clones. You see, when Naruto first awakened KCM, his clones also had access to this form. He then created hundreds of them and sent them across every major battlefield, at least in the anime. In the manga, it did seem as if he created much less, based on how many you can count on the panel. I would say that Naruto is still mid-creation, so you can assume that he continues to create more after this page, which explains why they did that in the anime. Either way, the point is that the many versions of Naruto we saw throughout the war performing Kage level feats were mere shadow clones, whether it be the ones that fought the Kages, Zabuza, or even Madara Uchiha. This also extends to the prowess displayed by Naruto himself in the fight versus Itachi, Nagato, and even Obito. So based on the mechanic behind the function of the shadow clones, the version of Naruto that was able to contend with some of the strongest characters at that point wasn't even at full power. Now, some have argued that this isn't the case since KCM clones are different from shadow clones, but that isn't really true. You see, the 8 Tails informed Naruto that while using the Bijuu chakra mode, the 9 Tails is siphoning away his chakra. This happens because in order to use the 9 Tails chakra, he has to shelve his own. And this is important because if Naruto's chakra is drained to zero, he will die. Which of course is not a problem for the 9 Tails because he's gonna come back in just a few years anyway. So he's willing to make that trade. Now the major problem with this is that he goes on to tell Naruto that it wouldn't be wise to use shadow clones in Bijuu chakra mode. That's because the 9 Tails will take an equal amount of Naruto's chakra from each clone. Because of course the shadow clone jutsu divides the chakra evenly among them. So if Naruto divides his chakra even further and the 9 Tails takes an equal amount of chakra from each of them, that simply allows him to drain Naruto's chakra even faster. This is very important to note because it confirms that Naruto's KCM shadow clones functions exactly the same as his regular shadow clones, which means that it has many of the same benefits but also the same flaws. In fact, KCM clones are so similar to the usual shadow clones to the point that they still evenly distribute his normal chakra even though they are formed using his KCM chakra. You'd think that since he shelved his own chakra and is now using Kurama's chakra, only Kurama's stolen chakra would have been evenly distributed. But no, it's both his chakra and Kurama's chakra, as indicated by this diagram. Which also means that similar to normal shadow clones, KCM clones also get weaker with each division. Now I should clarify because when people hear that someone gets weaker, they think in a very general sense. So that usually means a decrease in every physical attribute, including one's attack potency. But when it comes to Naruto's shadow clones, it's a bit more complicated. You see, there are some statements which imply that the shadow clones are weaker than the original, while in practice they don't appear to be. In fact, shadow clones being just as strong as the original is outright stated in the Naruto databook. The problem is that there are also multiple statements implying the opposite to some extent. For one, the jutsu itself is stated to evenly distribute chakra between the clones and the original, which is why one cannot distinguish between them. They also have the same abilities as Naruto himself, they think the same, fight the same, and even look the same. However, the manga makes it a point to have them fight on par with the original Naruto, operating with the same speed for combination attacks and seemingly exert similar levels of force to what Naruto is capable of doing all by himself. So by every visual indicator, the clones should be equal to the original in more than just chakra quantity. Now, if that is the case, there are two ways to interpret the shadow clones being equal to the original. For example, let's say Naruto creates 2 shadow clones. Since the jutsu requires that the chakra of the user is evenly distributed between each of them, Naruto and his clones would each have a third of Naruto's chakra. So in one interpretation, Naruto's clones would be equal in pretty much everything to the current version of the real Naruto, that only has a third of his original power. So the clones are equal to Naruto, just a weaker version of him. Now, the second interpretation dictates that even though Naruto separated his chakra into thirds, his original physical stats weren't affected, just the amount of chakra he possessed. So Naruto himself didn't get physically weaker after dividing his chakra, which also means that his clones retained those physical stats as well. So in one instance, less chakra doesn't equate to a decline in physical stats for the original Naruto or the clones he created, while in the first interpretation, the division of chakra does equate to an equivalent amount of decrease in stats across the board. Now the funny thing about this is that there's ample evidence validating both interpretations. For one, Naruto himself doesn't move slower, nor does his punches get weaker no matter the amount of clones he creates. He's still just as physically effective against his opponents, regardless of whether his clones range from 100 to 1000. This is shown multiple times in his fight versus Sasuke on the rooftop, later on in the final valley, his fight versus Gaara, and even his battle versus Kimimaro. This also extends to the untold amount of clones he created to send to every battlefield in the war. Naruto wasn't portrayed as physically weaker than he should be in his fight versus Obito, and neither was his clones that were combating Kage level opponents despite having hundreds if not 1000 clones spread across the entire world. Which, by the way, under the interpretation that less chakra equals less physical stats, Naruto at multiple points in the manga was operating at 1/1000th of his original stats, while at the same time outputting similar force to Naruto before he divided his chakra. This of course doesn't quite make sense, so dividing your chakra among your shadow clones clearly doesn't reduce the user's physical stats by equivalent amounts, which also means that chakra amount doesn't determine physical stats. Now that might sound crazy since chakra is used to increase physical stats such as speed, strength, and durability, etc. But it's a bit more complicated. You see, it was explained in part 1 that chakra is created by molding one's mental and physical energy, which is also described as stamina. This is also what's used to power taijutsu, which is pretty much anything having to do with physical movement and output, such as physical speed or striking strength. In fact, it outright states that taijutsu does not require chakra outside of a few exceptions, which will likely be body flicker and the 8 gates. So in essence, chakra amount doesn't determine physical stats. That is controlled by your stamina, which can also be used to create chakra. Now, I'm not gonna go fully in depth on this because I've already made a video on this topic, which you guys can go watch after this one. The point is that while there is division of chakra in the usage of shadow clones, which means each one's chakra gets progressively weaker as stated by Kakashi, this doesn't apply to the physical stats, which relies on stamina. What this means for KCM is that while Naruto retains his physical stats derived from his stamina, his chakra potency declines each time he divides. This means that Naruto's ninjutsu based attacks gets weaker the more he creates shadow clones. And if we assume, which would be the logical assumption, that the decline in potency is equivalent or somewhat proportional to the amount of times and the fraction to which his chakra is divided, which by the way is evenly, Naruto, while fighting some of the strongest characters in this manga, was operating to at least 1/100th of his original power. So the Naruto that kept up with Edo Itachi and Nagato was unquantifiably nerfed. The Naruto that kept up with Obito, the amplified Bijuu, and Madara Uchiha was also nerfed just the same. What this means is that Naruto, without separating his chakra to the tune of upwards of 100, is the aggregate of all that power. That means that none of these characters would be anywhere close to full power Naruto, who hasn't divided his potency by creating more shadow clones. Now, it doesn't end there because KCM does have one difference from normal shadow clones. While it does rely on stamina to power the physical stats of the user, and that stamina remains the same across each KCM clone, it also powers the user's physical stats using Kurama's chakra. That is the point of being a chakra mode. The user is always being powered by that chakra, and it affects every physical movement, as opposed to base shadow clones who can be physically boosted by the application of chakra but that isn't inherently the case. A chakra mode is one of those exceptions mentioned by Bijuu when explaining how chakra can influence physical stats, which is what happens with KCM. In fact, the boost Naruto gets from KCM is drastically more powerful than what he's capable of in base. What this simply means is that the power of KCM accounts for majority of his feats in this form, which also means that Naruto gets physically weaker and slower each time he creates a shadow clone. That is because, as I mentioned before, the potency of chakra decreases with each division, and also does the quantity. And since most of the physical prowess of KCM is derived from the potency of Kurama's chakra, his physical prowess would also decrease alongside it. So it isn't just Naruto's ninjutsu that gets weaker with each clone he creates, he also gets physically weaker and slower. Yet this weaker version of him was able to contend with the guys I mentioned earlier, while having upwards of 100 clones active at the time. Now some will argue that even though KCM clones are shadow clones with KCM, which means they function the same as shadow clones, maybe Kurama's chakra isn't evenly divided among them. Maybe all of them are just connected to the same pool and can take from it remotely. Which means while there would be a decline in quantity, there wouldn't be a decline in potency. The problem with this is that we've seen Naruto's shadow clones deplete their KCM chakra, and they didn't remotely just have some more transfer to their body. They had to fight in base or enter sage mode, and even receive more chakra from Kurama himself. And we know this wasn't because the pool of chakra Naruto stole from Kurama was finished, since Naruto himself and the other clones were still in KCM. So that does imply that the KCM chakra is also divided among them, which would obey the laws established for shadow clones. Though I will say that there is the possibility that while there is a decrease in chakra potency with each division, it isn't equivalent to the fraction of chakra that is shared between them. So it could be the case that the chakra just gets maybe 5% weaker, 10% weaker, who knows? There's many possibilities. In any case, KCM Naruto is just ridiculously powerful, and this isn't a problem per se. Maybe this is what Kishimoto intended. Maybe that is why he had him create that many clones, because if he didn't, his battles would have been far too easy. This also explains why Naruto seems a lot slower post his interaction with the Raikage. He went from being the fastest character in the manga, dodging A's fastest attack at point blank range, surpassing a form said to not be inferior to the Yellow Flash, to getting tagged by the average Joe and just characters who should be far slower than him. We never really get to see that speed again until like KCM2 when he speed blitzed the 5 Bijuu bombs and was compared to Minato's Flying Thunder God again. So it actually does make sense, ironically. With that said, that's it for the video. If I'm making sense, let me know in the comment section. If I'm not, don't let me know. I'm just kidding. Let me know as well. But if you guys liked it, drop a like. If you're new, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.